You have to tell the story about following the bulldozer.
What's that?
About following the bulldozer?
We missed that. That's way back when I was 10, 12 years old.
Well, we don't have to go in order.
But that just shows I was interested in bulldozers.
So tell the story. Is it on?
What's that?
You're on. Tell the story about the bulldozer.
Well, after I'd get done peddling papers in the wintertime, which was pretty late because there was lots of snow, the King County, Snohomish, Shoshone County, had a bulldozer that plowed snow so we'd get around the town. And what was his name? He was, I got to know him, the operator. He was a real good guy. And he'd be around town and I'd just follow him around to watch him plow snow. And Herman was his name. And he finally got buried trying to open Moon Pass. That's between Wallace and Avery. And the snow slide came down and buried him, smothered him right in the cat. They couldn't get him, dig him out. But years later, we went up there and we were going over Moon Pass, and I always hunted with what the hell is his name? He was the sheriff in Avery, George Payton. And he and we went up to Avery from Coeur d'Alene and didn't have a license, and they were sold out of license in Avery, so we came back over Moon Pass. That's a real high level pass, and to get a license, and it was about 6 o'clock. Well, there wasn't too much snow. And, George was over there, and we were involved. I guess that's where it was. And his nephew come over about 6 o'clock, and there wasn't too much snow, so we got our license, and all I had on was a pair of black jeans and just a jacket, and I didn't even have boots on. So we headed back over to Avery. That's where we were going to hunt. And we're hunting deer and elk. And we went out of Wallace at about 7 o'clock, I guess it was. And we got up to the top of the pass, and he had a Jeep, and we got spun out. So we got out with no real good clothes on, put chains on the back of it, and we got up to within just about the top, and the snow was all blown off the top. It snowed like hell from when that kid came over till we were going back over. And so we spun out and we couldn't go anymore. So we had a winch on the front of the Jeep. So I says, well, George, there's a Forest Service sign up there. I can maybe run the winch out and we'll get through this little bit of snow. And I said, then it's bare up on top. We'll be fine from there on, I think. I see one drift down over the hill, and we could probably get through that. So anyhow, I stringed the line out, and we put the Jeep. It didn't have any reverse on it. You had to pull the clutch out to unwind the line. Anyhow, we got up there and coiled the line all up and got back in. This thing hasn't done a cab on it. It's just got canvas top on it. Needless to say, it wasn't real well heated or anything. Anyhow, we take down off the other half, and all of a sudden the lights go out, everything goes out. We buried that Jeep in that next drift so you couldn't even see it. And I had to push the door open and sweep the snow away and push it open and sweep it away. It was a little kind of plastic doors. And I finally got out, and I just had to stomp the snow down to get down to where we could even get to the winch. It wouldn't back up, it wouldn't do anything. So I had to pull the line out, and there's only one tree up above it. I pulled the line and stomped up to the snow. It was about, I can't remember. It just drifted where we'd run into it. It was probably 3 feet deep. But anyhow, when you get up around those trees, well, the snow's on the limbs, and all of a sudden, boom, I slid in. I'm up to here in snow down in the limbs of that lousy tree. Anyhow, I got the line hooked around it, and of course we're pulling the Jeep sideways, so we wound around and pulled the Jeep crosswise, and then it bent the tree over so far that I couldn't get the clutch out, so I had to sit there and turn the control backwards, turn it backwards till I could get enough slack to get the clutch out. Anyhow, we got back downtown at 8 o'clock in the morning. We were gone 9 hours and didn't go anyplace. So then we had to go down through Coeur d'Alene and up through St. Mary's to get up to Avers. So that was another experience.
Tell us how you lost your finger.
Oh, when I was 4 years old,
Yeah.
my mom got a washing machine. She never had clothes on board. She was washing some clothes, and I want some crackers or something. The washing machine was in front of this out. And I climbed up there, and however, it just got a lever on it, turns it on and off. And somehow I got my finger into it, and his finger went below it, and it went above it, and pulled all the meat right off the bones. Anyhow, I was yelling and screaming. I remember my mom come in. We didn't have bandages or anything. She took an old piece of sheet and wrapped it up, and I can remember seeing that bloody piece of sheet. And she had to take me down to Wallace to the doctor, which was 7 miles. She took me down there. I'm sure we had I can't remember what kind of a car we had. We had a Packard later on. I don't know that we didn't have it. Maybe we had the Packard. Anyhow, that's how I lost my finger. And they tried to put the meat back on and tried to make it grow. I'm sure Bill would ride with me on the bus down to Wallace, 7 miles down, and to Wallace and back, and go to the doctor and find it. My mom says it started to smell, and the meat was starting to rot because it was, and so they just took the bone off, took the meat off, and took the bone off, and there it is. That's how I lost my finger. I don't know what else we missed.
What about whiz bang? I don't think you still told about the bulldozer.
I just told you.
Oh, did you?
I
What-
told you Walter, or not Walt. Herman was his last name. The bulldozer driver. I told you he got married in a snowslide later on.
Yeah.
And died. But I just followed him around town watching him plow snow. That old cat, because we had, usually had 3-4 feet of snow.
Didn't you follow your dad too?
What's that?
I thought you followed your dad.
How did I follow my dad? I went with him in the truck.
Right.
I
But
didn't-
I thought, wasn't that your first attraction to equipment was your dad?
Well, I suppose it was. He had a truck. I greased him. I had to grease him every few days. Yeah.
But your dad never had a bulldozer?
No,
No. So I had the story wrong.
no, he never had a bulldozer. He had a 1929 Dodge truck, just flatbed, and then he had a 1931 white. That's the one we used later, Wilbur and I used. And then he bought that new International in 1935 with the dump bed on.
So the man that you like, or the bulldozer operator, did he know that you
Oh yeah, all
were interested in equipment?
well, he must have figured that out as I followed him around watching.
No, I know, but did he talk to you or?
Oh, sure I do. Even talked to him about that. We didn't just, there was an old RD6, old clunky tractor. Then Mike Kinsella, the guys up there had a 3-cylinder, what was it? I can't remember what was the plowed the snow up for the mine. Where are we? Homer Butler and his Bob Butler that I went to school with, and his mother and dad. His dad had worked in the mine. He was a horseman. In the mine, they decided they were going to go to the coast because the war started. That was in 1940. So I told my mom, I said, the Butler says I could stay with them, so I think I'm going to go to the coast. So I quit the mine. That was in August or September. And we went to Portland. And they rented, I think they rented a house up in St. John's. So, and of course, you could get a job any time then when the war was going on. So I went to Homer Butler. I don't know what he did. He worked in the shipyard.
Should tell us about Mullen in World War II, how everyone left to go to war.
What's that?
Tell us about World War II and how all the Mullen guys.
On December 7th in Mullen, it was just like Exodus. There was 400 and some kids out of Mullen, and there's only 20 over 2,000 people in the whole town. When war was declared, they all left and went down and joined the military, including my brother. Brother Bill went. All of them went. It was just hardly ever anybody left in Mullen with any youth, except girls. Anyhow, an old Hal Sloppy, the paper I worked for, he kept track of all those kids. And he put out the paper every week, but he didn't have an article about the kids, but he kept track of all the kids out of Mullen, said where they were and what they were doing, and damn few of them out of the 400. I can't remember, only very few of them ever got killed. They're all tougher than hell. And they all survived. So.
And you tried to join up.
Yeah, I went down with them. And I went in, I passed everything, and then they checked on, I had to have a birth certificate or something. Anyhow, I wasn't old enough. So they told me to come back in a year. And when I went back in a year, well, they turned me around because his finger was off. So they turned me down. So then I volunteered a couple times, and I quit my job, so they put me in the military, and they never would take me, so I missed it. I worked in the shipyards in Portland, in the Vancouver shipyard. And they sent me out as a welder's helper, and I had, forgive me, 15 welders or something. I did everything for those guys would eat their lunch and take a crap, so find something to do. So. And they, every time one of them would leave, take a smoke, everybody smoked in those days. Every time he take a smoke, I'd use his stinger and find some scrap metal, and I'd be welding and finally the boss said, or I asked him if I could go to welding school. They had it right there. And so he let me go to welding school, and in about, I don't know, a couple of weeks, so I passed all the tests. They had a flat, vertical, and overhead. And of course, all the old guys before the war, they never welded vertical or we had to weld everything flat, so anybody that could weld vertical overhead. And I learned it real quick. They gave you two pieces of metal about this square and you had to weld them. And then they would cut them and they'd bend one. And if it broke, well then you failed because you welded it too hot. And they cut one, I forget how they cut one, if there's any wormholes in it or anything, they turned you down. And I passed all three of them, and so I went out welding them. In the first place you weld in the shipyards is in the double bottoms, about this deep where they store the fuel. You crawl around down in there and the smoke's so thick you can't even see a light bulb burning 10 feet from you hardly. They had fans, but they didn't work very good. And then I got up to welding on the upper part of the deck, and then I got welding on a shell crew, that's the outside of the ships. We're right on the Columbia River in Vancouver, and it's colder than hell in the wintertime. And ice on where we were sitting on the scaffolding. And I welded there for a while, and then I got to be a specialty. I got on a specialty crew, and all we welded was the hose pipes in the back of the ships. You started right there overtime, and you had it come up like this, and then you went almost flat, and you had to back out like that, sit down there all night. Then I got onto a better crew, and all I welded was the numbers on the ships, the number of feet of water. We had to take a little 332 rod and just run a real cute little bead all around there, and they painted inside of them. Then I got upgraded to an instructor, and they give me, so I'd have 3 ships, so I just take my hood and my leather jacket, I didn't wear the leather pants on, and I'd go just walk around the ships and see the old guys that were screwing up and go up and tap on the shoulder. I said, wait a minute, Dad, wait a minute. And he'd look me up and down and say, I've been welding longer than you've been alive. Yeah, Dad, that's right, but you didn't learn how to weld. Anyhow, they'd be welding overhead, and they'd bored a hole in the deck underneath from getting us so damn hot they couldn't weld it. I said, you go up on top, and when I get this hole plugged, you weld it up on top and get a chipper to chip it off so we don't get caught. So I welded a big slot that he'd dug out of the deck, and he'd get somebody up on top to do it, and have a grinder grind it off. So we didn't, the inspector didn't see that. It wouldn't have made much difference if they had been really weakened anything too much. So it was I was a pretty good welder.
So you left your mom, you left Mullen when you were what, 17? You said 1940, you would have only been 15. How old were you when you went to the coast?
When
With the
I did
Butlers?
No, I went when the war was declared. War was declared in
41?
41.
So you were only 16.
Yeah.
So you left school and left home. I thought you worked in the mines then. How old were you when you worked in the mines up there?
I had to be older. I was 17 when I went in the mines.
And you went to the coast after that?
Yeah, but I was only in the mines for 4 or 5 months. I was still 17. Went to in March and I left, I think, in August. Went to the shipyard.
So that would be 1942.
I was 17.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Betty and Ralph were over there. They were living there. when I went over there, but I didn't stay with them till years later. Then what did we do? I came up to Seattle here when I was in the shipyard for, God, it must have been a couple of years.
What brought you to Seattle?
What?
What brought you to Seattle?
Over sister and brother-in-law.
Yeah,
were-
Betty and Ralph.
I don't know what, well then, I come up here and went to work. Ralph was a foreman down at Fort Lewis or at McCord Field. And I went to work down there for the government, so as a mechanic. And we overhauled and maintained flying equipment, gas tankers and refuelers and all that kind of stuff. So I went to work down there and I lived with them, lived with Betty and Ralph and then we just drove back and forth from out by Burien. They lived on 136th. Lee had a 35 Ford, and we had lots of gasoline up in Fort Lewis, so, but he had ration cards. You're only allowed so many gallons a week if you could get if you had a reason to get a ration card. That was just to go to work, otherwise you couldn't get gas. So Lee had ration cards, so Ralph and I rode to work with him every day and more. I done half of my work getting them up both out of bed and getting them ready to go to work. So, and I was down there for, God, I don't know, 6 or 8 months. And finally I said, I'm not going to be late. We were late every day, unless I drove. And we had lots of gas, and because we were overhauling hangar and flying field equipment, and the tankers that come in there would have anywhere from 300 gallons of gas to 400 or 500 gallons of gas that you couldn't pump out. They were in the calibrators and the segregators and all that stuff. So I went to Tech Supply to, I forget her name, the gal that run it, and got her to get me a little tiny pump. And I'd go down all these tankers, and the last one to come in, I'd pump the gas out of all those little places in there and pump it into the last tanker. So, and Lee had this 35 Ford with the kind of sloping back, so I'd 2 Jeep cans just fit behind the back seat. So I'd fill up the 2 Jeep cans and put them behind his Ford, and then I'd fill up his tank, and away we'd go home. And then if I needed gas, I'd siphon it out of his car, and then the next day do the same thing again. So we had gas, and then
Is that when you took the girlfriend on the joyride in the tank?
the tank, yeah. There was this old M1 tank that the engineer battalion had that they were testing their bridges and stuff with it. And they got shipped out, all except Sergeant Key was his name. He got left behind, a great big handsome guy. And he talked himself out of getting to go overseas, I guess. So anyhow, I got batteries and everything, and got this old tank so it would run. You turn the switches in, and it had a 7-cylinder radial aircraft engine and a great big one, with big stacks coming outside, and the mufflers were gone. A lot of fire would come out of the stacks. Anyhow, I was the only one that could drive it because the gear shift was clear back here. It was hell of a ship. It had a 5-speed transmission. And all the girls had come up to the gals that run the papers around and stuff, and they always wanted to ride in that tank. So I'd take them. We were way out in the east end of McCord Field. We weren't around anything that bothered anything. They used to have a big area there where they trained soldiers, I guess, years before, and they had a whole bunch of these just wooden skeletons, and then they put candles on them. Every now and then I'd take these girls through these Scotch rooms that are real high, and they all knew that there was a stump in there that all stiffen up and everything. One time I come out the wrong side and got 2x4s were flying, and everything was flying their way. That was quite a time. But I had to do all the moving all the tankers around and bring them into the shop and take them out and park them and do all that side. And then if we ran out short of gas, I could go down to Tech Supply. A guy by the name of Swain was the head of the gas supply, and here this big nozzle was, and I'd get a Tech Supply for 1,000 gallons for testing, and I'd pull in there, and he said, well, Ed, tell me when you got 1,000 gallons. So the old tanker would be going dum, 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 dum. And I might had some over 4,000 gallons and some over 2,000 gallons. And I said, okay, Swain, I got my 1,000 gallons. I might have 1,500 or a whole bunch of this pretty blue gas. And he said, okay, we had go, so we had lots of gas and test with and everything else. So otherwise, we were supposed to drain these tankers where we brought them in, drain them, and take them out to the gas dump. And they had gas laying on the ground out there, just in puddles, in lakes, where all the airplanes that come in there, they drained the gas out of them and took them out to the gas dump. And I couldn't see wasting all that good gas, so we made good use of it. And there was this Sergeant Cheek, he and his buddies, they controlled the east gate so they could go in and out, do anything they wanted. So they had an old, I think it was a 29 ship touring car. So they'd come over and say, hey, we need some gas. And so they bring their old touring car with 2 50-gallon barrels in the back of it. And there it is, they'd fill them up, and they'd go out, and one of them lived by, it's Parkland or something right behind McCord Field. And they'd go out there and take their barrels out, and then they had gas for the whole weekend to run around with and everything. And every now and then they'd bring us a roast or some butter that we never got or anything. They were quite a bunch.
Is that when you went on the weekend down and fought with the sailors in the dance hall?
Oh, yeah, that went on. That's during that time when I was living with Betty and Ralph. It's Bob Wright lived with, he and I lived upstairs in Betty's house. And we'd go out dancing and raising hell. There's Bob Wright and Butch Falk and me, and then there was a couple other guys. We'd always go in down to the Fantasia in Tacoma one night, and Butch Falk had his girlfriend in the back seat, and I was jerking the car just to disrupt him, and this sailor walked up and said, if you can't drive that thing, stick it, you know. And I bailed out of the car, and Christ, I was almost looking at his belt buckle. He was a great big guy. And we got into it, and I had a wool gabardine shirt on. He got a hold of my shirt, and I couldn't get away from him. And finally he knocked me down. And he knocked me down before I got half up, and he knocked me down again. And I got up, and I had a ring on his finger. It was an Indian head. And I hit him so hard, it just cold cocked him, and down he went between two cars. I went over and picked him up, and he was talking to somebody someplace else. He wasn't even talking to me. So I gave him, it was 2 buddies with him. I gave him his buddies, well, just tell him to keep his mouth shut. And we all, the 3 of us, went in the dance hall, and pretty soon they came in, and I said to Bob, I said, I want to go down and wash my hands. And went down and washed, and when we come back out, this guy was telling them that all three of us jumped in. Well, the other two guys were half drunk, and they never even got out of the car. Anyhow, pretty soon they come over to me and they said, "Oh, we want to go back outside." And I got kind of nasty, and I said, "Well, I didn't lose anything last time I was out there. Let's go." And he said, "Well, you better get your buddies because there's 8 of us." I thought, "Oh shit, this can't work." Anyhow, we bought them a drink and went out to the car and bought a drink, kind of smoothed it all over. And about a half hour later, Bob and Butch went out to the car. You couldn't drink in the club, you had to drink in the car, so they went out to get a
That
drink.
makes sense.
And they
It's
came
no
in and they
prohibition.
were just beat to a pulp. These 8 guys, they hit Butch, I don't know how many times before he could even get out of the car. The whole side of his head was beat up. Their eyes were black. They were in hell of shape. And here they hadn't had any part of this thing. I was the only one that got into the fight. So anyhow, we're going around the next day, and here they all beat up, black and blue. And I didn't. I had a little bump on my chin where he hit me when I started to get back up. I was the one that started it. But don't go down where the Navy is unless you're prepared to whip the whole boat. Because that's what you're going to find if you start with one of them. Anyhow,
When did you take your little boat ride?
that's when I was living with Betty and Ralph. I had a little outboard. It was a 22-horse Johnson, and it was all stroked and everything else. And it didn't even have a muffler, it just had it open in the back. That thing would go like crazy. And this, what was his name? Jack Lampman, he and I were down on downtown Seattle there off, in the harbor. They were fishing. We fished for sea run cutthroat. It was pretty good fishing back in those days. And we weren't catching any fish, so we went up the Duwamish, and we were going like hell, big wave behind us. We thought it was funny enough. We wound up clear up above Spokane Street, and turned around. We were going back down, and here were 2 Coast Guard boats out in the middle of the river. They said, "Get over to the dock. The CO wants to talk to you." And God, he chewed us up. And he took our driver's license and took everything. He said, "Any damage on this river, you're going to pay triple for it." But he finally turned us loose. And really, we did damage, I think, because we never come and got to it. And another time, we were right over there by the cabin. I've told you this. We were tearing around over there, or I think we were salmon fishing that time. And we were cutting across, and all of a sudden there was a Coast Guard boat was waving at us. And I told Jack, "On the hell, he can't catch us." So we took off, and they chased us for a little bit, and I'm pretty sure there was a guy up on the bow, but he had a little gun. He was cranking it around, you're going to shoot us out of the water. So we stopped, and we were in the submarine area where they check submarines or something. He said, "Where's your chart?" Chart, shit, we didn't have any chart. Couldn't have probably read them if we had them. Anyhow, he finally turned us loose. He took our driver's license too, but we just crossed into the wrong waters. We hadn't done any damage to anybody.
Were you the driver?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, you were the driver in Alki too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we were showing off down to Alki one time. There's a bunch of girls down there on the beach, and we were cruising around there going like hell. And all of a sudden there was a kind of gravel sticking out, and Christ, we was out on top of that gravel, and the old motor was just throwing gravel and everything all over this big engine we had. And of course it broke the shear pin, so here we are showing off, and then all of a sudden we're dead in the water. Having to change the shear pin in the motor.
Weren't you waving to the girls when you
yeah.
ran up on the gravel?
Sure, we were big shots. And then they were waving it up. As we're sitting there dead in the water. Yeah. Had a lot of fun.
Well, when did you buy your first tractor?
1946. This is in 42 and along in there. I worked at Isaacson Ironworks. Well, I worked in Cornfield till I quit there, and then I went down my longshore worked on the Exmoor and Longshoremen's Union, and then I went up and joined the union, went up to the Union Hall, and they sent me down to Isaacson Ironworks. I went to work there, and forgot, I don't know, that must have been about 43 or up to 45 whenever the war was over. And we were building the ships, parts of ships. All we did was the gun mounts that went on the ships in Tacoma. And bulldozer blades, they were the only one that built bulldozers for Cletrac and for Caterpillar and for AC and all them. They bring their tractors in there. They might have bulldozer on them. And my guy Andy, he finally, after the war, he bought a sawmill up in what am I trying to say? Not Packwood was the town.
Randall?
Randall. And he and I were the only two that were Navy certified, but could weld. This was all stainless steel, and we had to build these gun mounts, and then they took them to Tacoma and mounted them on the ships in Tacoma. And of course, I told you that I told Andy one day, I said, we're worth more money than these other guys. They don't do the work we do. And he said, well, or he agreed. He Norwegian, he didn't say much anyhow. And I talked to Joe Kleepak, he was the foreman. And he says, well, you gotta talk to somebody higher than me. And then I said, who's hiring you? Well, Sprague was the welding superintendent. So I talked to Sprague, and he says, gotta talk to somebody higher than me. I says, who's hiring you? And he says, George Isaacson. So I walk into George Isaacson's office. He and his brother owned the company. And I told him what my problem was. And he says, well, how much more do you? We were getting, I think, 90 cents an hour. And he said, well, how much more do you think you're worth? Well, hell, I didn't know. And I said, well, at least a dime. That was 10% raise. So I probably should have said 2 bits. I might have got them. So anyhow, he gives us a dime. And I worked there till the war was over. And they were building houses over there off 136 where Betty and Ralph lived. There was a guy out there running the bulldozer. Ray Symes was his name. So I got to know him, and And so I wasn't an operator. I had never run cattle any little bit. Oh, I run cattle for old Bill. How was his name? He worked for the county. He had a TD-18. Well, I got to know him. And I run dozer for him for a little bit, learning. It wasn't anything real fancy, but I learned to run a cat. And then I talked to this Ray Symes, and I said I wanted to buy a bulldozer. He said, well, I wanted to know if he'd go to work for me. Well, he says, yeah, he would. And he was a good operator. And anyhow, we went down and we bought this HD-10 Alice Chalmers for, I forget what we paid for, $3,500 I think it was. And from Northwest Tractor, they call themselves. They were buying surplus by then. This war was just over. Anyhow, we went into a partnership, and I'd start at 4 o'clock. Then I went up to South Seattle Land Company, which was right up there at the top end. He canned his bulldozer operation. They have from out in the north end. Said he cheated them on the number of stumps and cheated on some billings or something. This O.R. Lindy, he owned South Seattle Land Company, he owned the water company, he owned all kinds of stuff, fishing plants up in Bellingham. And anyhow, he hired us. We were just working by the hour, and like I said, I'd start at 4 o'clock a day like one morning, and Simon would start at 4 o'clock the next morning. We run that cat this practically day and night, clearing land and shooting the stumps. We had a deal of $2 or $2.50, I think, per stump. And O.R. Lindy, I'd see him out there early in the morning. He'd come by to see if we were working, see if we were screwing off or working. And then he might come by at noon, and you'd see him. He'd have to watch for him because he'd never come over where you could see him. And then give him a bill, and he'd pay it. And one day we had a whole bunch of stumps we'd shot. And he come out and he said, "Oh, work." He always called me work. He said, "Seems like a hell of a lot of stumps." And so I said, "Well, come on, O.R. We'll go count them." Well, in the summertime when you shoot stumps, there's dust all over, all the brush and everything. He's always dressed up. So we walked out through there and counted, I don't know, I can't even remember how many we had, probably maybe 100 or something. And so he said, "Well, that's not enough. I think you're being square." I said, "Yep, O.R., I'll never bill you for something I don't do." So he paid us, and we worked for him. Then we built a bunch of road out on military road out by the airport. We built roads there for him. And we did all kinds of work for him.
What was in your Ray Symes? Did you have a company name or with your partner?
South Seattle Excavating.
South Seattle Excavating. That's what I thought. That was your first company.
Anyhow, he started, this guy, he had the water company out there, and he had all kinds of land, or he built roads for him, and he had a crew building houses. And he's been in his office, he got so his crew would come in at night and they'd drink beer and play poker or whatever they did. And he got so he was on booze, and he'd come over on the job. He said, "Come on, Work, take me down to the tavern." So I'd take him down to the tavern, and hell, we'd stay there for God knows when. And then I'd have to take him home because he couldn't drive. I can't remember where his car was. I guess he left it on the job. And he'd give me fish and all kinds of stuff that he had from his packing plants up in Bellingham. He was a real nice guy. He and I got a lot of real good Coke glasses, great big Norwegian. And he put that whole operation down the tube. he drank it all up and gave it away. He had two boys, I think, and a girl, Melanie or Melody or something. And his wife divorced him. He lost the whole Shamil. And of course, then we were there after 51, so we split up.
So you and Ray started South Seattle excavating in what year?
46.
1946 is when you went in business.
That's when we started.
Yeah.
And we got in a big fight over a fishing trip in 51 or 50. And it all ended. We'd take it one weekend every year. We had 2 or 3 trucks. And Lloyd Edmonds and something, he'd always go fishing with us. So he'd go up to Neah Bay and catch fish. And Ray never could catch a fish. And Lloyd always, he was a truck driver, he always could catch fish. And this year, we took boats up from Healy's Boathouse in West Seattle, and took them right out to Hole in the Wall. You guys don't know where that is. It's out by Tattoos Island where there's water out there, so we camped out there. And the first day, right out there's a rock out there, and silvers were in it, and I caught I don't know how many fish. I couldn't do anything wrong. And the next day we were going out, and Judy, we took my stepdad with him, and Judy caught one little fish, and Lloyd caught only 2 or 3 fish, but I just absolutely couldn't do anything wrong. I threw my bait in the water, caught another fish. Anyhow, we're going out the next day, and old Ray's line on his pole was all snarled up. He was reeling it off, trying to straighten it off. He had an old herring on his hook, and it was all knotted up. And he would just sit and turn on top of the water. And we were just going out to start fishing. And all of a sudden, he just got his line straightened out, and this old, big old salmon, I think it was a 51-pound salmon, grabbed that old herring, and he was dragging it in. I thought he'd snagged a log or something. It didn't do anything, but he just snagged it in, gaffed it, and pulled it into the boat. And of course, we went out that day, and I caught a bunch more fish, and we were coming in that night, and Ray was down in the boats, and he was cutting a notch out of the dorsal fin on his boat, on his fish that he caught. Maybe he caught a couple other ones too, I can't remember. He was marking his fish, and we came back, and I said, well, Ray, we better get together and divvy up these fish. Well, I think we ought to keep our own. And I said, well, that isn't the way we've done it. We've always dished them up. Everybody got the same share. And I said, that's the way I'm going to do it. I said, you must have been afraid of, to get your fish. Because I said, you were notching the dorsal fin on it. And he said he wasn't. And I said, Ray, I stood on the dock right above you and watched the Markham. Don't tell me you didn't. Anyhow, we got into a big argument. We finally settled it. And I came by his house that night about something. And he started calling me a liar. And he got louder and louder and louder and louder. And I told him, I said, Ray, you better shut up. I'm not going to listen to this. And anyhow, he said something else. The neighbors were coming out. It was right in the summertime. Neighbors were coming out. And he called me something, and I bailed out of the truck, and I hit him and knocked him down right in the middle of his driveway. I landed right on top of him. I said, I'll pound your goddamn head in the concrete here if you don't shut your mouth. And I said, you've always said you're going to divvy up this partnership. I said, I've never said it, but I'm saying it now. It's over. I'm not going to work with you anymore. This is it. Anyhow, we had a bookkeeper, Daryl Jacobson was his name on First Avenue. And I talked to Darrell and we couldn't agree on anything. So I finally said to him, I said, I'll tell you what, by this time we had a 3/4 yard shovel, we had a D6, we had the D7, we had a TD9, and we had 3 or 4 trucks in the low boy. We'd done very, very well in the 5 or 6 years we've been in business. And we couldn't settle on anything, so I finally said, listen, I'll tell you, you set the price on the machinery, and I'll take my pick, or I'll set the price, and you take your pick, and then whatever the difference is in the middle, we'll just settle that up with cash, or however. And so he knew that I needed all this stuff, I was doing all the work for Val Valdez, and he knew what tractors I needed. And I didn't, he knew I did. And we had a gravel pit out at 201st Avenue South. And we decided the trucks and the shovel went with the gravel pit. And anyhow, we got some kind of a price on that. Anyhow, he took all the stuff that he knew I needed and lowered the price way down on the stuff that he thought I didn't need. And I switched and took all the wrong stuff. He was just beside himself. Anyhow, we finally got separated. It took us a long time. And Darrell Jacobson was kind of the go-between. He didn't talk to me, I didn't talk to him. So. And then I went on my own. So.
Let's take another break.
So wait a minute, so when you went on,
I'm gonna take a break for about 10 hours.
wait a minute, so when you went on your own, that's when you started J working? When you were working for Bell and Valdez?
No, I think I had South Alabama going. And then when I got involved with George and George Bell and
Are we off?
No.
maybe he kept it, I don't.
No, I think you started with that and then, I think we have the paperwork where you started with South Seattle Excavating, but then in 50, when did you start J working? 50?
No, that was,
48? 40.
no, we split up in 50. I think we started JD work, I can't remember.
And what year did you get married to Mickey?
51.
So were you separated from Symes when you married Mickey?
Well, it all happened about the same time.
When did you go to the fortune teller? Before you got married or after?
Fortune. Yeah, I was dating a little blonde girl and going out with Mickey at the same time. Nemai was her name. She lived right across the street from Becky. I never really dated her, but seeing her all quite often. She lived right across the street.
No, but when did you go to the fortune teller?
During that time, I was building that little house on 4th Avenue, and Ray Sanders' wife kept going to that gal, Mrs. Grafton was her name.
That was the fortune teller?
Yeah, by Seattle. And so she talked me into going over there one time, and I was going to let that gal know if she told me anything. And she says, she told me my mother was having real problems with her legs. And Mom had varicose veins at that time. But he says she lives way over the mountains, but she's had a real problem with her legs. And she and I just sat there right and he blinked at him. He says, you're building a little house that's kind of up on a hill. And he says, you got a view, but she shook her head. She says, not very present. People across the road had a cow, and his butt was sticking out of the barn door all the time. She went on and told me several things. Said I was going with this fair-haired girl, and I'm not, but I would never marry her. I was going to marry a dark-haired one. And that's when I was going with Nikki. And I don't know what else she told me. She told me all kinds of stuff.
I thought you said that she told you were going to be married twice. Once to dark-haired, and
Yeah.
that's what you told me, and then the second marriage was to a fair-haired. No, I thought that's what you told me.
Maybe I did do that.
That's what you told me.
Anyhow, we're up to starting in business.
Good. That was fun.
Oh wait. What happened to Whiz Bang? Did we miss
Oh,
him?
that was in Mullen.
I know, we missed that. We gotta tell that story. That's the boys.
You gotta tell it, Dad.
You gotta tell it and then we'll
Well,
stop.
that's what I told you.
We got 3 minutes.
Saturday night, we always went downtown just to watch the fight. This little guy, Whiz Bang, he was always in a fight. He'd tackle anybody. And he was in the Miners Club one night. And I was in there, and he and his wife, or no, it wasn't his wife. And he got in a fight with this guy, and he knocked him out the front door. And he came back in, and the other guy's wife walked up to him with a bottle of beer and broke it. And the beer rattled run down over his face. You would think it would have knocked him out, but it didn't. He broke that bottle of beer. And pretty soon he walked up to him. He said, "Say, are you mad at me?" This guy knocked him out the front door. And his wife hit him with a bottle of beer, and he said, "Say, are you mad at me?" Never forget that. Whiz Bang.
Let's take a break.